We know life can be messy, and that's why you need a plan. Here at the Lifestyle Group, we want to meet you where you are in life and help you create the best home remodeling plan for your lifestyle. To us, plan is more than just a word. It's an acronym we live by for our clients. To always be prepared, to lead you through the process, to adapt to what you need, and to make sure there are no surprises. Each month on the Do You Plan podcast, we'll look into home remodeling projects that have inspired us, taught us, or can teach you for your future home remodel.
Welcome to another episode of the Do You Plan podcast. Today I have King Lumpkin and Heather Haas. Thank you both very much for joining me. I'm going to open this conversation in a slightly different way than I normally would for the benefit of both of you, because here I am as a remodeler having a conversation with two people who work together but haven't met each other until today. And so I'm gonna draw all this together. I really enjoy the topic of leadership, culture, people. I think people drive everything. They drive everything in my business, and they've led to the success that we've been able to have in our world. And I have had a lot of conversations with King over the years about hiring people, gathering information about interacting with leaders and those types of things. And just because I think he's a person that I have a great deal of respect for and that I get a lot from whenever I talk to him from a business perspective. And we've had many conversations over the years at softball fields across the state of Indiana and across the country as our daughters were playing together, going through those processes. So we became friends beyond the softball field, which is always something I've enjoyed. That is not the reason I have you here today. I have you here for your business sense and not for your softball sense.
Softball's a different podcast.
Softball's a different podcast. We probably need to do one, but that is not today. So the concept of the Do You Plan podcast for me is plan is an acronym in our company. The P stands for prepare. The L stands for lead. The A stands for adapt. And the N stands for no surprises, or represents no surprises. And I say an internal view of that and an external view of each of those letters. So when I think about preparing, I want our people to prepare for a project internally before we ever get to a client. And so we talk about that internal preparation. But then we also have an external element of it where we're preparing our client for what they're about to get into when we come into their home to do their kitchen or their bathroom or their whatever. We talk about leadership from the perspective of I want people that are willing to step up and be internal leaders, sometimes even when it's uncomfortable. And then at the same time, there are times that I'm talking to our clients about how they have to lead us through aspects of a project, right? While at the same time, most of the time we're leading them through what to expect. The adapt goes both ways as well. And the no surprises is just a very big one for me that I was in a session a couple weeks ago, and there was a comment that I wrote down that was, I pay you to tell me the truth, which I thought was very, very just a direct, simple statement, but it really hit on the no surprises piece, because in my mind, good news and bad news in the business world, they're just news. They're just things that we adapt to and react to pivot and make decisions from, right? To where we're going to go next. And so I want my people to understand that no surprises is very important to me, because we can deal with whatever problem comes up, and it's not about getting mad about it or whatever. Same thing from a client perspective. I know there's not a client that I've ever met that really wants a surprise something at the last minute that they weren't expecting, whether it's having to make a decision at 8 o'clock in the morning about where a switch goes, or why am I getting a $20,000 change order the last day for the last payment? Like, we would never do those things because I would never want them done to me, right? So all of that really has been built around the concept of people and leadership and culture and those types of things. Full disclosure, my daughter Lainey works for ADVISA. Yeah. I'm very excited about that, because I think one of the reasons that I really wanted to meet you and talk to you is, number one, she thinks so highly of you. But I love the fact that you have a company, and I'm going to be rude in a minute, and I normally would be ladies first. I'm going to have King introduce his company, and then I'm going to pivot to you. But I want to start by saying I love the fact that you have a company that works with others about how to develop those leadership traits and those interactions and that team environment but you live it. Like you do it, you model it and you represent it. And I know that from my conversations with her. And so that made me very intrigued to have a conversation with you about this.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, I would normally say ladies first, but I'm going to have King introduce himself and his company first. And the thing that's most interesting to me about you is how years ago you grasped onto this concept about understanding people and learning styles and personality traits and how they could help your business, and literally now work with their company today through an evolution over the years. But will you start by introducing your company, and then I'm going to pivot and have you talk about your background and your story to kind of get us in the conversation so people have some context. So you start, King,
Lead off
please.
batter.
Yep.
Lead off batter? Sure. Well, I am one of the co-founders, president, and chief acquisition officer for Prolific, which is a growth strategy firm. We created Prolific in 2019. And prior to that, I was president and COO of JDA, Joseph David Advertising, and have really spent, the better part of 35 years in the media business. So in addition to working with clients on a strategic growth plans, we own a variety of agencies that specialize in the brand, creative, digital, and PR space. So I focus not only on Prolific day-to-day business, but I also lead our M&A efforts.
And size of your company, just in terms of like your number of locations and number of employees approximate that you've grown to today?
Yeah, I just found out an interesting fact that in this, kind of work from anywhere environment that we're in now, we have employees in 17 states. But
wow.
We have 9 offices, about 123 employees. We just acquired another PR firm in April, which added a phenomenal team of a dozen new individuals. And we'll do about $75 million in top line revenue this year.
Well, fantastic. And your beginning of understanding and diving into the whole personality, learning styles conversation and that culture, how long have you been engaged in doing those types of things?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was, I'm a graduate of Wabash College, and going back to my Wabash days, I was a psychology major, economics minor. And I distinctly remember, and I think I still have the book, from an industrial psychology class. So maybe a little bit archaic by today's terms, but I was fascinated by the content of that class. And then kind of fast forward to our previous business, Rudder Communications. We used, and I was telling this, kind of prior to this, I was telling a story about using Berkman as a tool 22 years ago, maybe. And how insightful and how helpful that was, not only in terms of self-discovery, but in terms of relationally and being aware of the people that you work with and how informative and how that broke down some barriers on things that might have been rubs before, but became we're just different, but that's a good thing. And then jump forward to about 2016, we were we were in a huge growth phase because you go back to 2014, we only had 14 employees.
Wow. So
we're growing fast. We're needing to hire and onboard a lot of individuals. And we actually started working with 2 individuals, Steve Cockrum and Jeremy Kubasek, who founded Giant Worldwide. So we went over to London for quarterly for a year, and they built the 5 voices on the Myers-Briggs, whole chassis, if you will. So started getting into a little bit of the Myers-Briggs, and then that led to 5 voices, and just found that it was just incredible in terms of identifying the kind of individuals that we needed to fill certain roles as we grew, and what we were lacking and what we needed, and how we could most effectively work together. And then sometime around 2017, 2018, we were introduced to somebody, Mark Conley, who was with Culture Index, which, very close cousin to Predictive Index. Mm-hmm. And, we started using Culture Index, found it incredibly valuable. But all along the while, my wife's bank, Send to Your Bank, has been using Predictive Index for years. 35 years.
Yeah, long time.
Right. And so, being the very fascinating, interesting couple that we are, we sat around, at nights and on the couch and had conversations about predictive index and culture index. And then, having known a couple of people here at ADVISA and having that window into predictive index, and then seeing what predictive index has done over the last, few years and in investment in, found that in terms of the ability to scale in this relationship, we feel like we're taking it now to the next level by being able to partner with predictive index and ADVISA. So that's a little bit of the journey. It goes back a long way. I would say 22 years of really realizing how valuable it is. But over the last 7 years, as we've been in this kind of hyper growth phase, it's been incredible for us to use that information to try to make the best decisions as we're, quickly growing and scaling.
Very interesting. Okay, so your background is very interesting to me because I know that you came from an education background from my inside source. And I'm really interested in that. So when you tell your story about how you got here, please give some background as to where you started and how you got here.
Yeah. Well, I was an elementary education major. My passion was teaching and learning. So that was natural for me to major in education. And my first part of my career, I was a teacher. So I taught 6th grade, language arts and social studies. And I loved it. I loved many aspects of helping kids reach their potential. I also, though, started to see problems and things that could be better, about education, about the way things happen, which led me to pursue my master's in educational leadership. So also very naturally was drawn to leadership. How can I affect change on a broader scale than just my classroom?
Was your intent at the time to go into leading school, like being a principal, being in administration in the school system? Okay.
Yeah. So I had kind of that 7-year itch with having been in the classroom about that amount of time, and thought, I think the path for me here is to be a principal, have my own building. So I pursued that. And I also worked in the central office of the school corporation, where I was helping teachers use technology across the district and was kind of in more of a curriculum kind of role. Spent some time as an assistant principal at an elementary school. And so my journey out of education and into this is rather serendipitous. I had a connection that I knew through all the technology training I had been doing with teachers, a woman who worked for Apple. And she reached out to me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm moving to Indianapolis. I got a big Lilly grant. Would you like to take a year's leave of absence? Come join me to get this project off the ground for Indiana teachers." And when you're in education, that was like a get out of jail free card for me, to have this opportunity to step out, but the security to be like, but I can go back. So I always thought I would return. I didn't realize I was leaving education forever, because that opportunity took me to a nonprofit organization that was using predictive index and that was working with ADVISA. So I attended a workshop. I didn't know. I thought PI stood for private investigator. I mean, I had no idea. I had never used, unlike you, I had never used any tools like that in my early career. So I took the predictive index behavioral assessment, and then, our team goes to a session with a consultant who leads us through really just learning about how we're wired. And that self-awareness truly that I got in that session that day, I mean, I just had this moment of, I can't go back to education. It all made sense to me why I had felt in many ways sort of square peg in a round hole. Mm-hmm. Loved teaching and learning, but that environment for me, I was just kind of wilting. And what I learned about myself is that I'm extremely driven, very independent. I need to be able to make change and do it quickly. I need to be able to work with and through others and kind of have a stage, if you will, which I did have as a teacher. You have
one now. Look at this.
Yeah, look at this. It's amazing.
Yeah, we got you a stage.
Yeah. Also have an extreme sense of urgency to move things forward and take action, and then needed a lot of flexibility and opportunity to do things differently. So once I realized those insights about myself, I just was sort of changed, because it just gives you a new lens to understand your strengths and how they intersect with work. And so at the end of that session, I approached the consultant and just said, hey, I've never heard of this stuff before. I didn't even know it existed, but I'm fascinated and I know I can teach. And based on what you just told me about my results, I think I can sell. So if you're ever looking for to add someone to the team, I'm interested. And he was very gracious, but it was basically like, oh, that's great, kiddo, but we hire business people to be consultants. I was like, that's cool. That's great. And I really didn't think anything would come from it. But he did call me a couple weeks later and said, I think you should come meet the owner of the company. And so I joined in 2004 as a trainer. And so for many years, what I was doing is working with leaders like King, who wanted to understand, how does this kind of data help me, make better hiring decisions, get people in roles where they can use their strengths, but also help me coach and motivate and get teams to work better together and start to think about career pathing for people. So I spent a lot of years just working with leaders across all industries. And I started to really develop a vision. I was sort of an intrapreneur, I guess. I was starting to kind of ideate within the business that, all of this is really, we're thinking too small. What we're really doing is leader development here. We're teaching leaders how to get work done with and through their people. PI is an important part of that, but it's one part. So I started to develop this vision for, how do we really start to broaden the scope of this business and be about more, leader, team, and culture effectiveness? And that was what, Bob Wilson, who still is majority owner in the business. But at the time, he came to me and said, you seem to have a real view of where we can take this. And I don't want to do this day to day anymore. Do you want to work out a transition? And so we've been, in a slow but perfect, transition process since 2012, where I'm assuming ownership. And I've been in the president role then since 2012. So that's really the path. It was something I never could have. I didn't go to college and say, I want to be the president of a small boutique consulting firm. I went to college saying, I want to help kids learn and grow. But
they just happen to be big kids.
Yeah, exactly. Now I work with
right. Yes,
big
exactly.
Kids. Yeah.
There you go. No, that's perfect. That's a great starting point for a conversation then, because my first question as I hear that is, how has your message evolved over the last, say, 10 years? And I know there's been a lot of things in the last couple of years that have really impacted business and people interaction that we'll get to. But as you first started kind of creating the vision, where did you go with it? And then how did that evolve as you started to put it in application and to where you take it today with companies and leaders? And I want to give 2 seconds of background as well behind my question. So one of the people I respect in my industry is Curtis Rector.
Oh, of course.
And I've been on the board of directors for many years with Curtis, and Curtis will forever be famous to me because we sat in a boardroom in 2001, 2002, and we were talking about the growth of the housing market in Indianapolis and how none of this will ring true still today, how the various entities and neighborhoods and where I'm looking for the jurisdictions of the world didn't want the low cost housing in their backyard. The NIMBYism, right? You can build it, we just don't want it here. And Curtis kept saying, we have to reframe the debate. We have to change and talk about how it's really about housing and create job creation and starting families, and really just change how these entities look at what we're doing in their neighborhoods and around their schools and in their communities. And so I've always had a lot of respect for him for a very long time. And then in a conversation about a year ago, I found out that he was actually doing business with you guys.
Yeah.
And that says a lot too, that a company like that has entrusted their leadership development with you guys, and you're helping them to grow and adapt along the way. So when I ask that question, I'm really kind of curious to say, what did it look like in 2012 and where did you start to go with it? And then to get to the place that you are today?
Yeah, it's a great journey. In 2012, and Bob started the business in 1986. So there's a long history here. It was largely a business that was focused on finding companies like Prolific who need a tool to help them more effectively hire and coach people. And so it was what I would call a predictive index business. We were selling a software and then teaching people how to use that software and that data to make better decisions and connect people together. The shift, though, the reframe was really, like I said, it was getting above that and saying, companies who are investing in predictive index, I always used to say, those are what I call people first leaders. You don't spend money on a software platform. You don't spend the time to go to the training to understand the data unless you care about people, unless you care about trying to help people reach their potential and work well together. And the other thing kind of swirling around in all this, and it's especially front and center right now, was employee engagement and culture. And I think the big reframe for me that has put us on an exciting growth trajectory of late is that the way that you change culture to create a healthy, magnetic culture where the best and brightest want to be, it's not ping pong tables in the break room. It's not, a better handbook. It's not even that much to do with the work. Those are pieces of it, work schedule, flexibility, and all that. But the fastest way to change anything in your organization is through leader development. Your leaders are your culture carriers. Their mindsets, their behaviors are what set the tone and create a safe environment for people to flourish, create a fun environment for people. Whatever that culture ends up being, your culture is actually a lagging measure. It results from the mindsets and behaviors. So that was the big reframe for me, Geoff, was realizing like, oh my gosh, the place we need to focus is on leader effectiveness. Because if leaders have the mindsets and behaviors to create the intentional culture that they know is going to help them win, that's when, and then we help them pull in the tools like predictive index, or this morning when you guys got here, I was doing emotional intelligence session, or whatever the tools are, those we pull in, just like when you are remodeling a house. I mean, you help your customers figure out, what do we need to pull in here to achieve the look and the life that you're trying to live in this home? We take a very similar approach. What are you trying to do with your business? Let us help you define the culture that it's going to take to get there through creating core values and unpacking those into behaviors. And then let us help you really clarify, what are the leader capabilities? What does good leadership look like at Prolific? What is effective leadership at Arbor Homes? We help them define that. And then we build the programming and the experiences and the tool set to achieve that. So that was just, to me, that light bulb of like, the tip of the spear is leaders.
So the curriculum that you developed essentially over time is all built around leadership development at its core.
It is. It's really all built around, what do effective leaders need to say and do in order to create those magnetic cultures that will help companies compete and win talent. That's what companies need to thrive. They need the people to do the work.
And now, do you look at it through the same lens, or you're probably ultimately getting to the same place, but do you think about it in the way that she said it, or do you think about it in terms of hiring talent? Like, I'm curious now on the user side, as somebody who engages in it and believes in it, how have you viewed it? And what's your evolution been?
Yeah, I do think that that's certainly a significant portion of the way that we view it. I'd say we and maybe we should view it even more through that lens. I know going back to 2016, when we first started working with Steve and Jeremy, that was one of the things that really drew us to using 5 voices, was this notion around everybody can be a leader, and unlocking the leader, the liberating leader, within each individual. And when you're an organization of, at that point, 14, 20 25 people, whatever it is, there's a lot of people that are being asked to step up in the leadership
you
roles.
need everybody
and so forth.
to
You
see
do need
themselves
everybody
as
to
a
feel
leader.
that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I tend to break it down in some different categories for us. I mean, certainly talent acquisition. We're trying to put the right people in the right seats, given the best chance to succeed in the role in which they're coming into the company. More and more, we're trying to use it for professional development. I think that speaks to the leadership side of it, which is, we want to be a growth partner to everybody that's a part of Prolific, and how do we help them continue to advance and move along in their careers, and what are their drives, what are their needs, what are they uniquely gifted at doing, and then us helping them get there. And a part of that is obviously helping them become a more and more effective leader as a part of our organization, because we are that business that's completely dependent on people. I mean, we're only as good as the people that we have within the company, and then. I guess to some degree, which is I really use it in the M&A space now as well, because every organization has this different personality. One of the things that's become really cool is using the teams function of PI now. And, before it was kind of looking at each profile and then imagining what that looks like as a team. But now it's this ability to be able to kind of plot everybody and understand what are there, like 11 different team types, I think. Are they an exploring team, a stabilizing team, an adapting team? And so then we kind of understand not only what the P&L says and the balance sheet and, other things financially that we are considering, but then so what is kind of the secret sauce? What's the recipe to their success? And what does it look like or feel like to be a part of their organization based on the leaders of that company and the kind of culture or the way that they're working with clients and so forth. So kind of a long answer to say yes, we maybe not using it quite as succinctly, but I think in roundabout ways we're incorporating all those things. And the leadership aspect of it is, whether it's professional development or M&A, becomes really critical. And PI helps us understand some things that we probably wouldn't be able to understand nearly as well, or it would take us a long time to discover.
Well, one of the things I hear in what you're saying is the importance of self-awareness. And that really is where development starts. You have to be aware of how you're wired and what you need to be at your best. So all of the experience you have with different tools and different analytics, it's really an exercise in understanding ourselves and each other, so that now we can communicate more effectively and make decisions, in a more streamlined way, and all of the things.
Can you talk for a moment about what's posted outside each office in this building?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think when I think about my people, and I'll probably make all of my staff watch this, and they'll roll their eyes, but I think about that each person to a person that I have in my organization, I think very highly of. I think sometimes my people get more worried about kingdoms and moats and personal pride and those things. And I don't want those things. I don't believe in those things. I don't worry about those things. That's why that LEAD acronym, or that LEAD, the L piece, is important to me, because everybody can be a leader. And I think you hit it when you're a small organization. You do need everybody to step up, right? Talk about what's posted outside and how that creates awareness for of others.
Yeah, outside each door and office, we just have these placards that it's a visual picture of the person's behavioral results. So if you've ever seen a PI pattern, it's kind of lines and dots. But visually, it's a visual cue that when I walk into Brian's office or when I walk into Kate's office, to be reminded that Kate is someone who is helpful, accommodating. She's socially oriented. She has a sense of urgency. She also has a really high need for information, quality, and getting things right. When I walk into her office,
high D.
Yeah. Yep. You got it. When I walk into her office, I need to come with information. So the visual cue is about saying, I need to meet you where you are. And if I'm mindful of what you need and I'm going in that way, we're going to connect better and get more work done together. So it's really powerful. And then the other thing that's really important on our walls out there that relates to culture, we have our core values hanging on the wall. And talk about another visual cue. I believe that your core values are the pillars of your intentional culture. And so to have them on the wall, is one thing, but we also unpack those into behaviors. That way we can coach to those values. We can hold people accountable for those behaviors. We can celebrate people who are personifying our core values. So keeping your values front and center as much as the behavioral information about how people are motivated, both of those things help us stay focused on how do we create the kind of culture around here that attracts the people like Lainey, the best and the brightest, who fit that culture, who align with those values. That's how you make it happen.
So are you literally using that in your world to build your job descriptions for your new hires, and you're beginning at the very beginning of the process of the type of people that you're looking for as well? Because I know that's how he's using it, right?
Yeah, great question. I mean, predictive index is used to benchmark cognitive and behavioral requirements for jobs. So yes, like King, we're doing the same thing. I mean, we do have a cognitive and behavioral target for each of our positions, but I'm also very early in the recruiting. If you read any of our job postings, I'm not only leading with some of the behavioral trigger words and things that will connect with the kind of person that we need, but I lead with our values. I want people to read that and say, I want to work there. That is the kind of place where I want to put down roots, where I feel like I can flourish. So I really do think, and I'm pretty passionate about helping leaders clarify those core values for the organization, because you can use them to such good ends if they're real and if they're alive.
Right.
They can't just hang on the wall. The hanging on the wall is just the visual reminder of the importance of them. The living them out is really where it happens.
By the way, question on that. So you say, you want those core values to be front and center. So you're attracting the kind of people that you want to be part of the organization. Would it be fair to say too, that if they don't,
yes,
then that's okay too, right?
That's why I use
because
that word magnetic.
It's not going to be a match down the road.
That's right.
So determine that up front and avoid having to figure that out later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about magnetic culture and creating that word is chosen in particular because magnets, attract, but you can also repel the people and that's also what you want. I want the people, and that's not to say we're trying to hire clones of, we want diversity. We do want to continue to have people that we hire be a culture add, not necessarily a culture fit. So our culture can continue to evolve and grow, but those core values, those are the true north. Those are enduring as life changes and the business environment changes. So yeah.
I think it's very interesting from the perspective too that, like, I think you can get a sense of a good culture. Tell me if you agree with, both of you, tell me if you agree with this or disagree. I have a company that has very little turnover. I think that is an indication of a generally good culture, but that doesn't mean that all of the behaviors that run through it are the most productive or best for the organization. It just means, at a minimum, I guess it means it's comfortable. That could be a bad thing, I guess, at some level. But when you're working with companies or when you're implementing these things, are you literally working at the leader level, or are you getting down to staff level at times to make teams aware of one another's behaviors?
All of the above. Yeah, we work with leaders and teams. We even work with individual contributors. We do a lot of coaching. We have a lot of programming that's designed for what we call emerging leaders. So people who don't yet have position authority, they don't have direct reports, yet they aspire to lead as an individual in the role. So yes, we work with all of it.
And you've got personalized plans and programs put together for all of these different scenarios.
Yeah, and I'm sure, King can speak to this, but clients like Prolific who use predictive index, it's generally best practice that everybody gets to see their results, right? And we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So I imagine you've got people at all levels who understand these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going back to where you started on that was, we do workshops internally. And of course, we have teams, either we have new people coming into the company or, we have teams that are changing and evolving. And when we do those workshops, it's always like 50% of this is about self-awareness, right? Discoveries about yourself, or how you can leverage your natural gifts and talents, or understanding how you are unique in this organization. The other 50% is understanding team awareness.
That's right.
So and maybe that's even more than 50% sometimes, because I know where there are issues. Having that awareness of somebody else and the way that they're wired, it's maybe they are that, that personality that has that, they need details, right? They wear somebody out that's that more socially oriented person, right? So it's a high D versus a high B. And, you tend to give that person a lot of grace, understanding that that's just the way that they're wired. That's their perspective. That's what they do well, right? And so instead of that being a rub, that becomes, complimentary, that you give that, you respect the fact that what that person brings to the table. And
because you understand it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right
No, I think that
question back to both of you guys. Culture. You said something fascinating early on, which was about leaders and everybody being a carrier of the culture.
Yeah.
We often have those discussions, right? So it's, almost some organizations would suggest that, this is the person who's in charge of culture, versus an organization that says, no, culture rests on all your leaders or maybe all of your people. So I'd love to hear more about that from both of you, because we're inclined to say, look, there's no one keeper of the culture. Culture is as absolutely imperative to a successful organization and attracting and retaining the right people. But, a lot of people carry the responsibility for making sure that the right culture continues to exist and flourish.
I agree. I think we are all stewards of the culture. Mm-hmm. And especially when you have built a very healthy work culture that people have come to enjoy. When I say leaders carry the culture, I mean that they have the opportunity to drive it, change it, recognize it, celebrate it, hold people accountable. But everyone in the organization, once we know how do we want to treat each other around here? How do we want it to feel to work here? Once we have clarity about what that is, we each have to take personal accountability to show up every day at work and bring that to life. So I completely agree. And I love, on one hand, this trend toward, chief culture officer. That's great. Where it's a little challenging is when you have leaders who think that, we've hired it's like hiring the diversity officer. You think, we hired the position, so now box checked. And they don't realize that, the position is important, but you as the leader, you are the one who has to operationalize and celebrate and bring all of that work that the chief people officer, the chief diversity officer, you have to live that out. Otherwise, it's you lose credibility with your people, and it impacts your employer brand negatively.
They'll see through it right away.
Right away.
I mean, right away.
Yeah.
I feel like my responsibility is to model the culture that I want to create, and hope that people understand that it comes from a place of sincerity, and that it's not always going to be what they want to hear, but it's going to be what's best for the business. So I'll often say, hey, business is business, personal is personal. We're having a business conversation now about what's right for the company.
Yeah.
And then I will say, the company's my baby, raised it just like my children, right? And it's its own living, breathing entity that we're trying to preserve, that it's bigger than me, it's bigger than you.
Right.
It is this active, growing group of people that are put together to serve others, and that's what I want us to bring across to people. But I think where I have the rub at times is that while all of my people are well-meaning, they don't always live the values that are stated, and that's what's interesting about having this conversation with you is probably just the understanding that there are better tools out there for me to help grow people through some of that, that I probably didn't even really know existed, right? I knew there were programs. My daughter's a great saleswoman for what you guys do, but really the understanding of taking that person that says, man, I've been here forever, I want to be a leader. Why am I not a leader? And saying, okay, wait, step back and let's look at the behaviors, and let's look at how you carry yourself, and let's look at where you need to grow in order to achieve what you want to achieve. Because, I mean, it's in everybody's best interest to help people grow and get where they want, even if it's out of the company sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if everybody is constantly improving, that company is going to get better along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's it's an ongoing challenge in a small organization in my mind. So I've got 10 people, and everybody plays such a vital role in that. But I always tell my people, I'm the biggest advocate, but I'm also the biggest hurdle. I'm the kink in the hose because everything just kind of runs back through me, gets stuck through me, and it's not by design. I can push things away and try to let them go, but it's just nonstop in a small company. And you go through that. I think you go through that no man's land where you're too big to be small, but you're too small to be big. And you're trying to navigate that. Do we just take the plunge and hire? And if you build it, they will come. Or do you, especially in an environment like today where you're like, okay, we're going to be cautious and we're going to, grow organically. That's one of the things that I envy about you is just that you're like, let's just go. I'll just go buy people. I'll just go buy companies.
Yeah.
We'll grow our way through all of it.
If it were only that easy, but yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I know.
But you're being very strategic. I mean, in that when you buy a company, when you do M&A work, I heard you say earlier that you're looking at the composition of those teams, of the talents and the strengths of people. So that's really, a lot of people do M&A work and they're completely blind to all of those people dynamics. And you just buy two companies and smash everybody together and say, and now our new culture is this.
Right.
That's really overlooking what actually goes on between human beings and who they are and what they need to gel together, build trust, and actually move forward and create a new culture.
And that's where I think it's very interesting to take a step back and look at large organizations where you've got multiple departments and multiple personalities. And to me, I look at that and I'm always reflecting the leadership that I'm trying to present based on the experiences I have and see of people around me who work in environments that aren't as positive, and saying, why don't they just do this? Like I look at it and go, you've got all the resources in the world. The staffing's not an issue. The money's not an issue. Why can't you just be a better leader and a better steward of those resources and spend time and grow your people? But there are certain places and certain organizations, and I'm sure you navigate this a lot in your world, where they really need a chief blame officer because what they're really wanting to do is just deflect all the time. And getting, I even fight that in my culture. I'm of a mindset where I say, I'm not going to get mad at you if something happens, right? Good news, bad news. It doesn't matter. But I still get some of that deflection and that that blame from time to time. And it's like getting people beyond that hurdle is a really interesting endeavor.
Well, it is. Most people show up every day and they want to do a good job.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? Very rarely do you have people who are coming in and trying to underperform or trying to. So that's why, when you said, I think about these big organizations and why don't they just, because it's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see things, culture made simple or leadership made simple. It's not simple. It's actually very complex. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about changing mindsets and behaviors, especially for leaders who are trying to lead in a new way and learn new skills. If you've ever tried to lose 20 pounds or stop drinking Diet Coke or whatever, changing behavior is really hard. And changing culture starts with changing mindsets and behaviors. So now that's even more complex. So I think it's also to create space for leaders to make those transformations takes time and money.
Right.
So, I think that's what organizations are weighing. You mentioned Curtis Rector. I think he got to a point where he realized as we grow, if I'm going to scale this special thing that I've built here to other offices and other locations, I have to do that by investing in my leaders who are going to go out into those other places. And that's how, he did. He created the time, the space, and that's a long-term thing. You don't send somebody to leadership camp or send them to one workshop and they come back. I get people will call and say, oh, do you have a workshop for this? Yes, we have a workshop for everything. But what are you trying to accomplish?
I want to go to camp. See, you would suck me in with a leadership camp. 3 days and yeah,
that would be fun.
No,
this whole notion of culture, it can't be overstated, and I'm fascinated on the whole notion of changing culture as well, because if I relate this back to the M&A space, there's, at a high level, I say there's three things that have to work, for a transaction to take place. There has to be a strategic fit, right? I mean, so that's easy. Do they have capabilities or deliverables or verticals or geography or, some other strategic things that make sense to add to our overall business? We acquired a firm back in 2019. They brought PR into our world that we didn't possess before. It was a great strategic fit. Then there's the financial fit, right? I mean, it's just numbers. So, are we able to agree on, that there is some trailing aspects of EBITDA and a multiple that we can agree on and how we're going to pay it and do all those things? Those are kind of easy to work through to some degree. Either you agree or you don't agree. Either there's a strategic fit there or not. Either both parties can agree on some type of financial terms or not. But it's culture that makes or breaks whether a deal ultimately works or not. And I'm often asked about how, the kind of time that it takes, from start to finish. And, it's probably at least 9 months and can be even longer than that. And people ask me, what can we shorten that? Can we do it even faster? And it's like, well, the most important aspect of all this is to kind of let some things marinate and discover over time if there truly is a cultural fit. Because if there's not a cultural fit, then you're not going to be able to maximize ultimately, the upside of that acquisition. So when you start to think about the number of strategic and financial, potential fits, and then you narrow that down by the number of cultural fits that go along with it, then all of a sudden this universe of potential acquisitions actually narrows to a pretty small universe. And the number one reason why a deal is not going to work is because there's not a cultural fit. You can't get along. You don't see the world the same way. They're antithetical to what you believe or vice versa. Conversely, if there is a cultural fit and you can start to, one of the best things when we made an acquisition a few years ago, I brought some of my existing team with me to go down and start the integration process. And they came away from that first day and they said, boy, this place feels just like us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, perfect. And you know what? The results have been incredible ever since because we have that dynamic. So I've taken the approach that if there's not a cultural fit, we're not going to go in and try and fix it. Right? We can't change it. The culture is what the culture is. If we can enhance it by the combination of the two parties, we can maybe learn some things from them. They can learn some things from us. But if it's not a fit, if it's not a match, then it's going to be doomed, long term. And it's better for us just to walk away from that opportunity because ultimately, I don't know how you change culture without changing all the people. And if we're changing all the people, then why are we doing it in the first place?
I think in M&A, that's exactly the way to look at it, because you don't want to go in and have to take on a cultural project because you've got to see a return on your investment. You've got to start to see the reason we came together here was to grow. And like I said, all that culture work takes time. But I think in your business, in my business, in a business where you're not doing M&A necessarily, but you have a group of leaders and you have a strategic plan, and you know that we have to create a work environment where the best and brightest want to be. That's how you can start making leaders aware that it's your job to help create this environment. And the way that you create the environment is the way you talk to your employees, the way that you coach them or don't, the way that you care about them and pay attention to what's going on outside of work. Those are the ways I think you can actually shift a culture over time. But that's the key. It's over time. And I think culture change is most realistic in companies where it's your baby, like you said. Like you want to pour into that organization to help it grow up in the way that it needs to grow up to achieve what it's possible what they can achieve.
Right. And when I listen to you talk about targeting a company for acquisition, I think it's at some level, it's just a different widget, because my scenario that replicates that might be targeting new talent that has to fit our culture as well, right? It's a much smaller scale. It might be identifying a new talented carpenter that could come in and have an impact on our team. But that in our world might still be 10, 12, 15% of our scale and you're looking to scale 10, 12, 15%
Exactly,
with
yeah.
a deal. And it's just number of bodies. But the concept is exactly the same. So I don't know that it really matters whether you're large or small when you're talking about trying to find that culture fit. I am curious to ask you as a follow-up, how long into those conversations does it typically take for you to figure out whether there's a fit or not? And maybe what are some of the triggers of the things that you're noticing that make it feel like a fit or make it not feel like a fit?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And of course, I'm usually meeting the leaders of those organizations first, right? So, Geoff, if I meet you and I get to know you, I'd be pretty surprised if there was a bad culture, at your company, right? Because if the culture reflects your values and who you are as a person, then there's a pretty good chance it's going to be a good one. Same with Heather, from, hearing everything that's important to you and your values and you as a person. If you had a bad culture here, that would be kind of a shocking gap from
Right.
who you are as a person. So as you get to know the leaders, and if we're following through on that earlier conversation, which if leaders, carry and dictate and shape culture, then, if you start to meet, those top 3, 4, 6 people in the organization, then you get a chance of starting to understand what the culture is. What do they talk about? How do they talk about their people? How do they talk about their clients? What's important to them from a business perspective? And if you just listen, to what they say and how they say it, then you start to get a sense of the values of the organization and the way that they run their business. And if you do get to go a little bit deeper, then you start to meet more people and you find out they're living out, what they're telling me, or are they just trying to polish it up a little bit, make it sound good? And that's where that whole marinating time comes in, right? Because, if you have multiple interactions and so forth, you start to get to know the organization at a deeper level. Then you start to flush these things out. Are they consistent? Are they living out? Do the people that report up through them, are they saying the same things? Are they acting in the same way? And you just find if there's, do you agree with, what they're saying and how they're doing it? And do you see it consistent throughout the organization? And, from conversation to conversation, are they saying the same things? And, maybe in 3 months they can put on a good act, right? In 3 months, you can maybe say some things because, this is what you need to say or it needs to sound good. But if it's 6 months or 9 months or a year of getting to know somebody or organization, then that's when you start to get a real sense of, is this truly who they are? And, but I've never, we've walked away from deals because the leaders, it was evident that there wasn't a match there from a value standpoint. And then I rarely have ever come across an organization where I met the top leaders or leader and really felt like they were a great match from a values perspective with us, and they didn't have a really good organization behind them. So that's just very rare.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to extend what you were saying about you've got the top leaders and that there's usually, if you're a good person, odds are you're going to have a healthy work culture. It is interesting though. We do something called a leadership and culture assessment where we have top level leaders, next level, and sometimes even next level. It depends on the size of the organization, how many leaders we get involved in this. But we're asking questions about, how consistently are leaders displaying these behaviors? Organizationally, what kinds of capabilities are present? And then there's some employee loyalty questions as well. But what's fascinating is often there's alignment at the top, that top level, the owners, the founders, the people. But then sometimes there is a disconnect. As you go down through, it's like the message gets a little softer and softer.
Telephone game.
Yeah, it's like the telephone game, and the perception of what do I need to do around here to be effective as a leader, it changes as you go. It's just natural for that to happen. So we use that data and that assessment as a way to begin a conversation with a leadership team to say, let's look at this data. And what's the implication of the fact that at the top, you say this, you do this, but in the middle, something's getting lost in translation? And how does that impact the employee experience? How does that impact your ability to recruit and retain and develop? So
do you see situations where, I'll say the lower levels of leadership, they're craving that guidance and that support at a higher level, and the executive level C-suite type people just are missing it and not giving that. Do you see it in reverse? Because I agree. I think that you can look at a group of leaders and probably get a pretty good sense of the organization pretty quickly based on how they carry themselves. I also see the reverse in bad cultures where the leadership can be solid and just craving that support, that involvement, but they don't get it. And so do you guys actually spend time educating leaders on, I think you're missing the mark?
Well, if you look at the data on what, Gen Z, younger generation workers want in the workplace, they want to do meaningful work. So this is a generation of people who want to know that what they're doing matters outside the walls of the business, outside of just putting money in someone's pocket. The other thing right up there that they want is development. So yes, Lainey's the perfect example. She's someone who she's the youngest person in our organization. Her coming into the organization, I have to be mindful of the fact that what she wants more than anything is she wants to grow. She wants someone to pour into her, to talk to her about the business and to coach her on how to be more successful in the business and what to do differently next time. So yes, I do think that people are craving it. And it's not just young people. I think most high achieving people want to grow. They want to get better. And the way that you get better is you can have a formal development program in place where you're getting some of that, but some of it is through the one-on-one relationship that I have with my direct supervisor.
It strikes me as you talk about that and you talk about investing and pouring into your people. Sometimes I'll just speak for myself. I can think that I'm doing that, but maybe not giving them everything that they need from their perspective. And there again, we're looking at it through our lens, right? I can think that I'm doing it, but it almost doesn't matter. I have to kind of see it through their eyes and in their shoes, what they see.
Yeah. And that predictive index behavioral data can help you understand what does this person need to be at their best. But I always tell people the easiest way to find out if you're giving someone what they need is just ask them. Is there anything else that I could be doing to support your success here? Or is there anything about our working relationship that we could improve? And, sometimes the most powerful things are the most obvious things. We just don't stop long enough to,
that's it.
You know what I mean? To say, I should probably hit the pause button here and check in with King and see how we're working together.
Yeah.
Geoff, can I?
Yeah, please.
I don't mean to hijack
the
question asker person.
No, you're good.
So, okay, you mentioned EQ assessment before. Yeah. So I would, so we obviously use predictive index. That's something that comes up more frequently now in terms of, we have some really intelligent, amazingly capable, talented people, but sometimes it seems like there's EQ can be a bit of a gap, from a leadership perspective. So what is the tool that you're using and how important do you think that is to overall leadership? And
as you get ready to answer that for the millions of people watching and listening around the world, would you talk about what EQ is? I know at a high level, but for people who don't know.
Yeah, EQ is emotional intelligence. So sometimes it's referred to as EI. Which the simplest way to describe what that is, it's the ability to recognize one's own emotions and the emotions and feelings of other people, and then use that information to improve decision-making, communication, building trust and shared purpose with others. So it's really just about, does an individual have the ability to pay attention to how they're feeling and how others are feeling, and then, use those insights to improve how we work together. And to your question, it's more important now than it's ever been. If I think back 5 years, how long have we been doing EQ? I think we brought it into the practice about 10 years ago. It was a really forward-thinking, what I call people first leader who would invest in EQ. Because it was sort of a nice to have, touchy-feely, who needs that? Well, look what we've been through as a society. and trying to come back, and people are still reeling. And if you look out there now, I mean, empathy is one of the top capabilities for effective leadership today. 10 years ago, it was not. It was not on anyone's radar. So empathy is one of the EQ competencies that we focus on, among others. But that's just an example of you can be brilliant and you can have all the right ideas and be able to put plans and strategies together. But if you can't be sensitive to someone who's had a death in their family, or be aware that someone needs you to just be a little slower, or, those are the kinds of awareness, that kind of awareness, I think, is what really sets the best leaders apart from the rest. The tool we use is the EQI 2.0. Mm-hmm. So it's an assessment, of course. You get information about how strong you are on 15 EQ competencies or skills, and different than the predictive index behavioral assessment, which is stable over time, right? So your core personality isn't going to shift a whole lot throughout your life. I mean, you can change your behavior, but the core of who you are tends to be pretty stable and consistent. Your EQ can be developed. So when you take that EQI 2.0 assessment, you're getting a snapshot in time. How am I doing across these 15 things? And given what I'm trying to achieve today in my role, where should I be focusing on developing so that I can show up in a more empathetic way in this hybrid work environment where my team is really struggling? Or so that I can exercise more impulse control in this environment where things are rapidly changing and I need to be careful not to make hasty decisions, whatever the case may be. I was just teaching this morning a group of leaders, and I used a bicycle as a metaphor that if you think of a bike, the back wheel is kind of the thrust. That's like your core personality. That's what you're bringing into the world. But the front wheel and the steering wheel, especially, that's your EQ. That's what helps you steer. So, I mean, I'm a very driven and impatient person. That's what I bring into the world. But there are times where I need to slow down and let other people drive. That's my EQ that kicks in and helps me manage those tendencies, because I know that it's going to be better for that other person if I let them figure it out.
So you find that you can help somebody enhance their EQ over time.
Yes. But just like anything, just like if you want to lose 15 pounds, you have to do the work.
Right.
Yeah.
So it starts with the awareness, but it is possible. It's
through more self-awareness.
Possible. Yeah. And there are skills and tools and things that we, in fact, this morning, the skill that I was teaching this group of leaders, they're in a trucking company, right? So this is pretty hard-nosed. These are terminal managers who are dealing with the guys and gals who drive trucks. And sometimes they come back to the terminal and they're frustrated and the load wasn't, and there's issues. So they're coming back into the terminal and they're angry or
and they've
frustrated.
been in that truck for 2 hours stewing on their way back in.
Maybe they're lonely, whatever the things are, right? And it was teaching this group of leaders that when that emotion is coming into the terminal, just say something like, King, it sounds like you had a terrible day. It sounds awful. Let them have that, even if you disagree with it. Empathy is not agreement. You can empathize and you can validate someone's feelings. Once you do that, then the wall comes down. Now you can problem solve this part of your brain. But until you meet people, I'm pointing back here because your amygdala, sometimes when people are really emotionally activated, it's coming from that part, a more primal part of their brain. And when you're trying to analytically problem solve or give somebody feedback on how they could do it better next time, when they're emotionally a wreck, that's just not helpful.
See, I knew there was a reason I was helping you with your malfunctioning amygdala.
Absolutely.
Went on the softball field when you were all wound up, and I'm like, take a breath.
You recognized it.
I recognized it, brought you back.
You had high EQ.
That's an
amygdala
hijack, we call that.
There you go.
No, everybody has those moments.
It's true.
Yeah.
It really is.
That is funny.
He'd give me the hand signals.
I'd be like, it's okay.
And breathing actually is a very effective strategy.
So it's a great lead in to maybe a final path of discussion around leading in a remote work environment coming out of COVID with a young workforce that wants flexibility, but you're trying to ensure productivity and you're trying to take care of clients and all of those things. You're trying to bring this mess together. And I always say, trust people to do the right thing. Trust but verify, right? Inspect what you expect, all of those niche phrases. But how are you guiding leaders in today's world to support their employees when they may not be seeing them all the time and they may not be interacting as much?
It's a huge challenge. Generally, what I would say is a hybrid or virtual work, and I'm interested in your take on this too, King, since you have people spread out all over. But in a hybrid or virtual work environment, you have to be that much better as a leader. It's actually easier when you see everybody every day and you've got the nuances of tone and nonverbals and, we can walk over to lunch. When you're only seeing people through a little tile on the computer, you have to be even more clear in your communication. You have to be even more thoughtful in meeting preparation. You have to be even more on top of follow-up and documentation. And you have to be so intentional about creating opportunities for people to connect. So it just raises the bar dramatically. I mean, you can, in many cases, what we've seen is leaders who were like pretty good before are struggling now because it's like, I don't have my superpower anymore. I used to see these people every day and it was just easier. And now I don't know what they're doing. And so just all these things creep in. So quickly, I think there are three things that are essential in managing in a hybrid work environment. The first is crystal clarity about outcomes and results. So you've got to make sure that your people know and that you know what is it that they are supposed to do and how do we measure success. Because sometimes if we're not on the same page there, the rest of it just gets worse from there. So I think that clarifying performance outcomes is really essential. The second thing in a hybrid work environment is you have to prioritize time for connecting. Because when you don't see people around the office and you don't walk over to get lunch, some of the natural connections that tend to happen have disappeared. So it seems like a waste of time and nobody likes extra long Zoom meetings. But you've got to build in sort of like icebreakers or fun ways to get people in breakout rooms, not talking about work, but give them prompts and give them ways to get to know each other and talk about other things. So prioritizing time for connection. And then also, how can we get together in person to build connection at the right times? Then I think the third thing in a hybrid work environment is remembering the importance of the one-on-one in between whatever your standing Zoom. You need to I don't want to say double, but whatever your one-on-one rhythm was before, it needs to be more now. Because that time for that employee to just, even if it's just a call, sometimes that's also nice. Stop with the Zoom. Let's just get on the phone and we can both go on a walk at the same time and then just talk to people. How's it going? How are you doing? How can I help? What's been challenging? What are you proud of? So those are really kind of three things that I try to remind leaders are super important.
I read an article a week or two ago, and I think the headline of it was something along the lines of on-site is the new off-site, right? It's like
that's awesome. Yeah.
Coming back together at the place that we all used to work together every day is our new version of an off-site meeting. We just force ourselves to come together. And I find in my business, even though I don't have the remote locations and those types of things, but what I do have is I have a staff full of people going in different directions every single day where, one of my guys went on a big fishing trip that he goes on in May every year. And I saw him for the first time the other day. First time I got to ask him, did you catch any fish and how did it go? I hadn't literally seen him in weeks because he didn't have a reason to come to the office. He was going out to the job site. So I think that's actually very good advice about being very intentional about creating those one-on-one conversation. moments?
Yeah, I would put ours into kind of three categories. You touched on a little bit of it, but spontaneous communication, mentorship, and culture. And we're actually doing a deep dive right now, trying to figure out what does the future of work look like for us. I think we've got a long way to go before we see the consequences of a lot of these things play out. And, where does the pendulum end up swinging back? On some level, we were comfortable because, we had offices in 13 states going back in the 90s, right? When, you couldn't do a Zoom call over AOL. It just didn't work very well, right? But so we were kind of navigating the environment long before. And then once the pandemic hit, our teams were amazing. Even those that weren't used to working remotely, the ability to adapt to that environment and serve our clients as well as better as we ever have was remarkable. So it wasn't as if we took a step back in terms of our ability to do our jobs and do it really well. If anything, maybe we were more productive and we were really leaning into our clients and we were really doing great work. So super proud of our team, but it's what's the sweet spot long term? And so I say those three categories, which is one, for somebody who's a high B and a low C, and right, I enjoy you have to be so intentional around Zoom and other things. I like being able to walk around our office and run into people and have those conversations that maybe you wouldn't even thought to have had if you didn't see them, that you have to schedule a Zoom call, or something else. And some of those conversations end up being incredibly meaningful. So I really enjoy that interaction. I think a lot of people enjoy that interaction, and I think it enhances the overall business because of that additional communication that takes place. And then there's the whole mentorship. You were talking about Gen Z and developing and meaning and so forth. And, it's this whole idea of, can you really develop? When I first started a long time ago, long before empathy was really important in a leader, all I was told was, look, if you work 16 hours a day, then you're going to get twice as much experience as somebody who's working 8 hours a day, right? And that's how you accelerate your career, which worked out well when I started a business at 24 years old. But, so can young people really mentor? We have so many phenomenal people within our company. If I'm fresh out of college or somebody early in my career, I would want to be spending as much time as I could learning from them, being with them, because that's only going to make me better, faster in my career. So how much of that are you missing, if you're not physically there? And then the third thing is culture, which is, I often, if you're just looking at the people you work with through a screen every day, and somebody else gives you a higher number that they're going to pay you, and all you're doing is changing the screen, the people you're seeing on the other side of your computer screen. There's no stickiness, there's no culture. How do you get somebody to really love who you are as a company, and want to build a career there long term and be sticky? The whole idea, how do you build culture? And some of the things that you talked about doing, we have some people that do a great job of trying to, add those additional elements so that we are coming together in different ways, sometimes with, not discussing business whatsoever. But it's certainly building a strong culture when people aren't there, and interacting every day seems to be more challenging. So we've been doing this for about 6 months. And really trying to take a deep look at our business and figure out where we think right now what's best for us. Doesn't mean it would be best for the company down the street or a few floors below us, but for us and the work that we do and the clients that we serve, what does that need to look like? And hopefully in the next few months we'll put a stake in the ground, and then we'll see how that evolves over the coming quarters and years, and then maybe we'll have to continue to pivot as we learn more.
If you had one or two things, you have a company that's never done any of this but has good intentions, where does a company start in your world? Do you start with a leadership development at the highest levels? Do you start by doing EI type stuff with your people after PI type stuff? Like, what's the path that you bring somebody in and guide them down?
We have a process, in a perfect world that we take a company through. It starts with what we call diagnose and define. So we do try to start with some kind of data collection, whether it's that leadership and culture assessment that helps shine a light on some opportunities for change, whether it's the predictive index behavioral assessment, gathering data on leaders and people, whether it's engagement data, doing an engagement survey, EQ. So let's diagnose what's going on here. Let's understand some root cause things on the people side of the business. And then let's define the core values, the intentional culture, and the leader capabilities that you need to thrive and be successful in the future. So that's that first phase. Diagnose opportunities for change, define the culture, define leader capabilities. Once that's there, then the next phase is where we're really designing a solution or an intervention that will help you make change. So sometimes that design phase, and that's in your world, that's like, you're designing the plans for the new kitchen. You've heard what they want, you understand. Now you're going to design and make the plans. We put a lot of emphasis on, like I said, it's not about just send leaders to a workshop. We're trying to design learning experiences and help companies implement tools and systems to help people make change over time. So there usually is a learning journey involved. There usually is some kind of system like predictive index involved. There's usually some coaching, what happens after the workshop. It's helpful to have a coach, et cetera. So that design phase, we're coming up with what is it that's going to work best to create change in your organization. And then the last phase for us is we deploy our team to deliver the learning experiences, to measure the impact of our training. Is it giving you the results that you wanted? We have a client service team that is there to help our predictive index clients who need help using the software. So diagnose and define is where we start. We design really customized solutions, and then we deploy our team to bring those to life. And we kind of cycle through that process over time. Not all of our clients, Geoff, go through that really holistic approach. I mean, some of them just want to use predictive index and they want us to be on the other end of the phone when they have a question. Some of them just want to, do a workshop on a thing and they're good. But in a perfect world, that's really how we create change and have the ability to have the kind of impact that really makes a difference in the lives of the people who work in the organization.
What have I missed? Go ahead.
I have a PI leadership question that I wanted to ask. And I became, so convinced around the idea of trying to align somebody's PI profile with the job that we were trying to recruit for. And so I want that high D in a accounting finance role, or when a project manager with a high C for systems and processes, or that high A, high B in a new business development capacity and so forth. But I feel as if we tend to get, particularly in recruiting leaders, it's a captain, or it's a maverick, or it's a venturer. And, as time has gone on, I've realized that leadership can look a lot of different ways. So how do you believe that you need to hire a certain profile, if you will, to be an effective leader? Or is it that any profile can be a leader, and what that looks like and sounds like is just different from person to person based on their profile?
Yeah, we believe that everybody can be a leader. What's different, though, is the environment, the deliverables, how high are the stakes, what level. So regardless, there are some types of leadership roles that do require that vision setting, or vision casting, or it requires you to be a very strategic thinker with an eye to results. It requires you to make decisions without all the. You do have to benchmark what you need in certain levels of leadership, and then you have to take stock of who do we have and how do they match up. So anybody in any role, it's an exercise of fits and gaps. So broadly speaking, yes, do you use a job target? And when you're hiring from the outside where you know nothing about these people, is it helpful to have insight into how does this outsider that I don't know at all line up with what we know the job requires? So yeah, generally speaking, hiring to get that fit is a good idea, but it's also okay to hire someone that doesn't exactly fit. And then the key there is they have to be self-aware. You have to know where your strengths match up with what this role requires, and then build your team to fill in
to
around.
complement them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think honestly, the just hire what fits the job target, that's honestly the easy way because, and it's okay to do that, but you do have to be careful because you can start to, and you've probably experienced this because you've been using these tools for a long time. You can start to have, all these people are all very similar. And yes, their behaviors line up well with what the job requires, but we could really benefit from another point of view or diversity of thought. So you have to balance job fit with diversity and sprinkle in the development of people so that no matter who you are and what you bring, we're trying to give you the tools to thrive and succeed in that leadership role. Often, though, tragically, in my experience, we're not giving any tools and we're not giving any development. We're putting people in these roles and saying, good luck.
Right. Well,
and then we're frustrated when they don't perform.
And I think even the most well-intentioned companies and leaders can get caught on that hamster wheel where they're just running
Yes.
and trying to, there's no ill intention at all. They're just busy and reactive. And as a result, they're not giving people what they need. I think one of the most interesting things that I've heard in this conversation is the ability for somebody to be self-aware might be the single most important characteristic that I would want in somebody. Because I think
then they're coachable.
They're coachable, and you can fill gaps around them and you can grow them. It's the people that don't have that awareness that become the wall that you're trying to break through.
Yeah, I mean we just went through a workshop for a group of interns earlier this week, and I've had a chance to do this with a number of college students over time. Those are my favorite ones because I'm like, I wish I would have been able to go through something similar when I was starting my career, or even before I started my career back in college, because of that self-awareness piece. I mean, you figure out a lot of things along the way, but you might get some bumps and bruises, as you do. And to be self-aware about those things as you're making important life decisions about what you want to pursue as a career or a major or whatever that might be, I can't imagine it being more valuable than when you're a 20-something and you have that information.
What have I missed? What did I not ask, or what did we not talk about that we should have talked about today?
You said softball's a different podcast. So.
Yeah, it's a different podcast. That is true. That is true.
And I'll have to hit you up separately about my kitchen.
There you go.
remodel.
Yeah, we can talk about that as well. No. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate both of you and the perspectives that you bring. As I said, I kind of geek out on this stuff because the people aspect of the business is probably the thing that I enjoy most. And I just appreciate the time that you took and the conversation that we had. You're probably going to get a client out of this because you didn't know it, but this was a job interview.
This a job interview?
No, but it is something near and dear. I might be the new client. Yeah, I might be the new client.
I thought you had your own resource already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the behind the scenes. Yeah. No, I think I'm constantly learning, right? I mean, people who are active learners, they're looking for the next thing to get better. And so I had made a conscious decision in my business probably 2 years ago that I wanted to start growing the business in a way, or growing the foundation of the business in a way that we would be attractive to the best talent out there. And part of those things become, how do you handle benefits? How do you handle 401ks? Those things that are staples. But then there's this soft stuff that it's much more important than even those things, because they're the things that people value in the marketplace. But it's also interesting to me how you communicate. So now I'm going to go stalk your job postings and see how you communicate those values and weave that into a job description or a job posting, because I think, just a little thing like that is really, really important to identifying people that are going to be a fit in your organization. It's really interesting.
We're happy to help. This was a pleasure. It was great to spend time with a client and talk to you, and fun conversation for a Friday.
So, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Do you have a home remodeling question? Or would you like to know what the best remodeling plan would be to fit your lifestyle? Submit your questions now at lifestylegroup.com, and we may answer them on a future episode. Stay tuned to see what advice the Lifestyle Group has for you on the next episode of the Do You Plan podcast.